You're listening to The Cogito Show, a podcast that explores the brains of highly successful individuals. On this show, we delve into what it means to think just a little bit smarter. I'm your host, Mark Mariano, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me. If you're new here, I'm so proud of you for taking initiative towards being open-minded and receptive. If you could please leave a 5-star review on the Apple Podcast page, it would help my message reach more bright people just like you. Again, thank you for gifting me with your valuable time. Now on with the episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Cogito Show. Today I'll be doing another recording of the Cogi-thoughts series. Today I'm going to be trying something differently. I actually am recording this on a camera, so this will be on my YouTube channel, which is, if you look up on YouTube, Mark Jarrell, you could find me there. It's MarcJarrel. And if you're from YouTube, this is the Cogito Show podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you could listen to a podcast. And that is spelled TheCogitoshow. So thank you for being here today. Today, I want to talk about something that has become apparent, especially during the global pandemic that is going on in this world. It's the idea of workism and the value of work and how it's being reshaped in American culture. If you've never listened or watched one of these Cogi-thoughts, essentially I just pick a topic and I discuss it for 5 to 10 minutes, and hopefully it facilitates conversation. So the whole concept of workism was coined by a man named Derek Thompson, who works for The Atlantic. And essentially the idea of it is that work is the new religion. And the reason we think that is because a lot of the things that people used to try to find in religion is now sought after through work and labor. So for example, people would be religious because it would transcend their human identity. It was their purpose. It was their calling. Religion was a thing that gave people a promising identity. But what's really interesting is that now we see that in work. We see a lot of people go into work and work becomes the centerpiece of their identity and has become their purpose. It's essentially like a religion within itself because it's just a really interesting idea, as we're always told as children, like the number one piece of advice that you hear all the time is follow your dreams, make your career your passion. But what I find a lot with like content creation, or for people who do, like, we see people who quote unquote are successful and followed their dreams but are still miserable. And a lot of that is because we've put our identity onto the amount of work that we do, the amount of productivity that we have, the status of our careers, not feeling like there's a purpose in the work that we're doing is this idea of value that has been put onto you and hasn't been created by yourself. In America, we need to reframe what we identify as work, because there's a lot of work being done that isn't identified as valuable, which we all know is valuable. For example, my favorite example is mothers when they're at work. Not when they're at work. My favorite example is mothers when they're at home, taking care of their children. That is work. That is 100% work. You are caring for an actual human being who will one day grow up and be a member of this society. But our economics and our current society values that work at nothing, which we all know isn't true. In fact, it's arguable that mothers at home are doing some of the hardest work in our society because it's completely necessary and has to be done. But they're not being paid for it. And that's, again, because we've put so much emphasis on our value through money, productivity, um, and those kind of go now have to be hand in hand with your career, which is a new idea. I think people need to realize how new of an idea this is. Like 100 years ago, um, we would just have jobs because work had to be done, right? We would farm, we would um, do construction, we would because that work had to be done, right? Derek Thompson uses the term, we went from jobs to careers to callings. And it's really interesting because, like I said, back then we only had jobs because the work needed to be done. And then around the 20th century, when the things like CEOs or COOs, those 3-word titles started coming up, businesses were booming. Suddenly, there was this corporate ladder that was ingested into the human race. And that's something that's never happened before. And it's still something that we are adjusting to this day. So when you go from a job to career to a calling, the reason why it's so instigated into your core value that you have to follow your calling is because that's what all of the CEOs and all of the, athletes or the, artists, they are the ones who tell you to follow your dreams. And what we also are finding is the rich people now are doing a lot more work than they used to do, right? Before, it's been historically recorded that rich people would work a lot less than the middle class and lower class, which to an extent is still true. But we're finding now that the richer are working 10 times harder than they used to. And that work mentality is being trickled down through everyone in the society. So it's just a really interesting concept that work is our identity. It is our calling. We have to have purpose within our work now because society tells us we do. But there are 2 ways to absolve this. I mean, first of all, there are 2 big problems here, which I feel like need to be identified. The first problem is that a lot of the time, America is feeding you this false narrative of the American dream. I still truly believe that the American dream is real, but I think that America falsely advertises it to everybody in this world because the fact of the matter is, like, the American dream is true, but it only happens to a select few of people, right? We, all these CEOs, all of these actors, all of these people who are successful tell you to follow your dreams. Yet, there are not that many jobs that allow people to do that. It's super ironic. It's this interesting dichotomy because you have all these people around you, teachers, all the figures that you looked up to as you were growing up to tell you to follow your dreams and to find a career or a job that corroborated with your passion, and they had to go hand in hand. But there's not enough jobs that do that. You can't find a purpose in being a cashier. There's no higher purpose in that, right? Do you see this dichotomy? You have society telling you you have to find your purpose through your job and your work. Your productivity is what is your identity. So if you're a normal person and you hear that, you subconsciously are taking that in, and that is your core value, that my job reflects my personal identity. But then you're a cashier at a Save Mart. That'll make you feel like shit. It would. It absolutely would. But that's what America is telling you. That's what this society that we're in is feeding onto you now. So how do you fix it? Well, that's one of the problems, first of all. The second problem is that we aren't identifying work again. Like I said, with the whole mother example, there are mothers at home who are working their asses off and are getting paid not even a single cent because the economy tells them that their work isn't valuable. also in hand with that, creatives, right? It's a lot of like the work I do, or a lot of the work that creatives do, is intangible work. It's work that you put out there in hopes that something happens, right? There's no guarantee. If I, like my minimum wage job, I work at a boba shop, right? I know that when I walk into that store and I work for these set amount of hours, by the end of it, I know I'm going to have X amount of dollars in my pocket. But for this podcast, or like my YouTube channel, or for anything um, creative, there's no guarantee that this works out. There isn't. No matter what anyone says, right? There's no guarantee that I put this podcast out there and anybody listens to it, but that's okay. I think people need to understand that that's okay. And that's hard to hear because, again, we've been so ingrained that our work has to come with some sort of set of value after we put it in. There needs to be a cause and effect. We have to push and something has to come out. But that doesn't make the work that I do less of work. It is still work. It's just there is no direct value afterwards. So it's just interesting. There's so many things about work in America, and this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to it. But the overall consensus is work has become a religion for some people. Your identity is placed on the work that you do. Right? It's no longer do you find people having to get minimum wage jobs like people don't get jobs because it's a necessity anymore. Or like jobs aren't like how they used to be, where, like I said, people were farming because that work had to be done. Now it's more of selling, like being a cashier. Being a cashier is, I think, the most popular job in America, if I'm not mistaken. So it's such an interesting ethos of value that has been placed onto us. So how do we fix it? Well, there's two ways. Again, the article that I'm basing this off of is called "The Religion of Workism is Making Americans Miserable" by The Atlantic. It is written by Derek Thompson. So there are two ways to fix it. You have the trickle down approach, or you have the trickle up approach. The trickle down is arguably, on paper, should be the easiest, but it's not. You change public policy. You tell the federal government to allow workers in the working class to be able to have a career that they feel like they have a purpose, but also be able to sustain themselves. What Derek Thompson has found is that, or not Derek Thompson. There was, I forgot his name, but there was this economist who found that when he interviewed Americans who felt that they were burning out, it was for one reason and one reason only. Or it wasn't Americans who were burning out. He essentially interviewed people who felt like their jobs had purpose, but they didn't like their jobs. So for example, teachers, right? The teachers really felt like they were giving value to a lot of these kids because they are. Or social workers, right? They are changing people's lives every day at their work. But the problem is they aren't making enough money to sustain their own family. So they're expected to sustain all these other people, but they can't even sustain themselves. So the approach to fix that is the federal government just pays these people more, right? Or they create more careers like that, where their work that they're doing can be seen as an overlurking passion, or there's this reason why there's a purpose in their work, right? Their work is bigger than them, in a sense. It's not just being a cashier and scanning items, because like that could be automated, and it's going to be automated at some point in America, right? These social workers, these teachers are doing things that will transcend themselves. right? So they need to be paid more, right? We need to start shifting the idea that value can go hand in hand with those types of careers. The second way you could fix it is from the individualistic standpoint. So from the bottom up, right? Doing the work to detach yourself from your work, ironically, and, you know, um, reframing your identity and what makes of your identity. Because it's so much that your identity nowadays is what you do or what your career is or what your hobbies are, not who you are as a person. So doing that work of understanding that my career, my school, my grades don't influence my identity, right? Or finding a purpose in something else, whether that's religion, right? It could be, Catholicism, Christianity, Buddhism, or even in philosophy. Existentialism is a great one. Just detaching your identity from the things that you do and rather from a purpose or a call. That's not the right word. From just detaching your overall identity from your work. It's an interesting food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this. I did enjoy recording this. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, the podcast is called The Cogito Show. You could find it anywhere on Spotify and Apple Podcast. I'm probably going to do more of these. I do enjoy doing these a lot. So thank you for listening and thank you for watching. And I'll see you on the next one.